Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Stacy Trasancos will discuss how we can help young people to think critically to discover the truth. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you will be able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter after the presentation or after her part of the presentation in the Go To Webinar box. All of the webinars will be recorded, and there we go. My program here is, my PowerPoint has just gone down here, but that's okay. We will continue, and then we'll come back up here in just a moment. The webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you via email tomorrow. Okay. So I would like to introduce and welcome our presenter today. Stacy A. Trasancos is Executive Director of the St. Philip Institute of Catechesis and Evangelization in the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. She is a fellow for Bishop Robert Barron's Word on Fire Institute and teaches theology at Seton Hall University and science at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Trasancos is the author of Particles of Faith, Science Was Born of Christianity, and 20 Answers Bioethics. Stacy, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to do these webinars.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Okay.
I'll close out my webcam and then come back on when you're all done.
Okay.
There we go.
We got it? Can see the screen?
We sure can.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. You see the picture me and the real me on the screen here. I really appreciate you coming to hear this talk today. I generally talk about faith and science, but as I mature and as my children grow older and I learn more and think more about education and parenting and the meaning of life in general, I've gone beyond the faith and science circle, and because that was always about evangelization anyway for me, into bigger circles about how to bring the faith to people in a way that is impactful in their lives and in the real challenges that people are facing. One of the challenges as a parent and an educator that I'm always thinking about is how to teach young people, especially anyone, but young people especially, how to think critically. And I wanted to talk about that today. I'm going to jump off of my book, Particles of Faith. I wrote this book when we lived for 5 years in the wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains, out in upstate New York. My family and I moved to a wooded 20 acres with a lake and a 100-year-old hunting lodge cabin, so it was a very rustic lifestyle. We homeschooled the children. I never left the house except to go to Mass on Sundays, and we got groceries, and that was the only time I left the house. My husband worked. But the kids and I pretty much lived for 5 years like we're all living now in quarantine. So we got this. We know what we're doing here. The kids, though, for those 5 years of their childhood, grew up running around, playing in the snow when it was snowing, playing outside, building forts, and being educated at home. During those years, I was also writing Particles of Faith. Took 2 years of those 5, and then talking about Particles of Faith. And really, I did a lot of walking. I walked my German Shepherd, Benny, named after the Pope Benedict. So I wanted my own German Shepherd. And so Benny and I walked 5 miles a day out in the wilderness up there in our trails and things, thinking about how to write this book. And I spent more time walking and thinking than actually writing, because I would come up with the fundamental things I'm trying to convey in the book. So it was a very soul searching time for me. In those years, this is my youngest child. His name is Jose Jacinto Trasancos. He's JJ for short, because with my Texas accent, that's more how it comes out. JJ is 4 in this picture. And in those years, with my youngest child, teaching online chemistry classes, with him a lot of times in my lap or playing at my feet or hanging around with me, he would, because his sisters would be homeschooling, doing their work mostly, not always, but you know how it goes when you're homeschooling. He spent a lot of time with me, hearing me talk about atoms. And all the while I'm trying this very sophisticated, hard thinking, you know, like, how am I going to write this book about science and faith? What's the most important things I want to say? And I was way overthinking it. JJ heard me talking about atoms, heard me saying that everything is made of atoms. And at 4, he got that simple truth. And he's like, wait, Mom, everything's made of atoms? You mean my arm's made of atoms? Like, yes, your arm is made up of atoms. Yes, everything physical, the wall, the tree. We went on for months. Everything he would point to, is this made of atoms? Is this, you know, the air you're breathing, your coat, the trees around you, the sunshine, you know, is coming from atoms and hydrogen and helium in the sun. And he really took it to heart. And I started the book Particles of Faith that way, because one night when JJ was eating spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite dinner, I asked him to say the prayer alone, because when you have 5 kids, you don't hear the kids pray alone very much. So it was just the 2 of us. And I said, JJ, at 4, say a prayer. And he said, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy atoms, which we are about to receive from thy bounty. And it was hilarious, but it was like the simple truth out of the mouth of a child. He there in those 3 words, these thy atoms, captured everything I was trying to say about faith and science. And it's very, very simple. I dedicated the book to JJ, and Ave Maria Press made this beautiful little dedication page for him with the cross in the molecule of atoms. That science is the study of the handiwork of God. It's that simple. And that is the message of the whole book. Science is the study of the handiwork of God. When you study science and all the laws of physics and biology and chemistry, you're studying what God made. And when you look at it that way, the whole faith and science conflict myth is poof, gone. And this is the attitude I've always instilled in my students and my children. Fundamentally, look out at the universe like a Catholic and say, thank you, God, for making all of this, just like we say thank you for making the spaghetti and meatballs. And then go forth and do chemistry, physics, and biology and study it thoroughly with the confidence and the certainty that you are studying what the Creator created. So I dedicated the book to JJ. He even said he needed to pee atoms once, and that made it into the book because it was hilarious. The thing is, he's being what I call a thorough materialist. This is a phrase I borrowed from Father Stanley Yockey, who I also mentioned in the preface of the book. The point here to critical thinking is to actually think critically, and I'll define what I mean by those words in a minute. You have to undercut all of it. You have to get underneath it all and say, what is my fundamental assumption I'm looking at? And I've learned this with children. I've learned it with students. And in my own life, having been an actual atheist, materialist, scientism, whatever you want to call it, life was messed up. Amoral, everything's made of atoms and molecules, including my children, other people. I very much had that mindset myself. And you fundamentally have to undercut everything that's going on in your head and understand your starting assumptions. And that is the key. And that's what I want to talk about today is how do we do that with our youth? How do we make sure they fundamentally understand? I know this from experience. I'm serious about it. I mean it with all my heart, with everything I have in me to say it. It matters to our students. They need what they're learning to be legitimate. And if you miss giving them the foundation about their worldview and what it is we're doing, you can build all this other stuff up on top of it, but they're not going to have that grounding in the truth that they need. And so just like I say to all my science students, science is the study of the handiwork of God. Go learn to derive equations now. They never question whether science is going to disprove God any more than my son would have questioned that spaghetti and meatballs disproved mom who made it. Like, of course, mom is there. I have the spaghetti and meatballs. Of course, God's there. We have the universe. That fundamental assumption is so important in everything we do. I wrote the second book and published it last year for students, so it's the student edition, and had to think even more. But during this part of my life, we had moved from the Adirondack Mountains in New York back to my birthplace, Texas. And so I was already in the mode of thinking about evangelizing and education beyond science and faith, beyond science into all of faith. And we moved back to Texas, where I grew up, where I left my Baptist upbringing to let go of religion altogether. And I meet, some of you may have heard of him, Bishop Joseph Strickland, who was starting up a catechetical and evangelization institute in the Diocese of Tyler to turn it into a teaching institute. After a few months of hanging around, I ended up becoming the executive director of this institute, which is a real blessing. After 15 years of being home, I found myself back to work full time just as my kids were getting older. And they are now in public school in Lindale, Texas, and I'm back to work full time. Last 3 weeks I've been at home, but it's been a real blessing, this journey into faith. I want to take something that was in the student edition of the book and build on it here in the context of teaching Catholic youth to think critically, not just about science, but about everything. Here's something I wrote. I want to go through it real quick. 3 steps for discussing science in the light of faith. So this is in the first chapter of the student book, and it is what I'm doing to lay that groundwork about having a legitimate, coherent worldview that you understand. Let's just lay it down, our starting point, and know what it is we're doing. I've seen among youth a tendency to dive into a new topic, kind of like they're taking algebra class. I have to get the right answer. There's one right answer. I have to find that one right answer. And so they learn how to do the steps to get the one right answer, and then they can be relieved that they learned how to do it. I teach AP chemistry right now. I've got a class, and I always tell them this: you have to let go of that idea that there is just one right answer. A lot of the hard, complex things in life that we deal with don't have just one right answer or one way to get to that answer. There's a number of ways, and there's a number of assumptions you have to make, and there's a number of fudge factors you have to allow for, or parameters, isolations that you have to design if you're a chemist in your experiments. But everything in life, you've got to understand what the parameters are of what you're doing, and the more you get into complex thinking, the more you have to get comfortable with the idea that sometimes you may not know an answer. Sometimes the whole mental exercise, intellectual exercise, is clarifying the questions. So I want students to let go of this idea that there's one right answer. And don't be anxious. Dive into it. The subject matter, whatever it is, physics generally is very stressful for students. Let go of this idea that you're ever going to understand it fully. I've been doing chemistry for 3 decades. I still don't know everything there is to know about the atom, and that's probably the thing in science we know the most about. No scientist does. None of us know how many chemical reactions are clicking away right now in our bodies to cause our hearts to beat one more time. There's so much going on. So try to instill in them this systematic thinking. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Tiptoe into it and just start learning the science. And learn it in the light of faith, always with your worldview that, like JJ said, God made everything, just like we pray in the creed. There's no shame in admitting your limits. It's an intellectual virtue to be honest about the limits of your knowledge, and it's actually quite liberating and clarifying. It's okay to say, I don't know. If you truly don't know, don't try to pretend like you do. Say, I don't know. I've talked so many physics students at higher level physics through problems. I don't tell them the answer. I don't even help them with the answer. I ask them to talk their way through it and pinpoint exactly when they stop understanding the next step, because we don't get to wave any magic wands. And just by them doing that, they figure it out on their own. I do that with my children when they lose something. Go back to the last time you saw the thing. Go through it one step at a time and be honest about when you stop knowing something. That's actually the very first part of practicing the virtue of prudence. You've got to know, I know this, I know this, I know this. I stop knowing here. And then you're free to explore because you've clarified the questions. Don't rush to form opinions. The most controversial topics in anything, not just science and religion, are debated because there are no clear answers. We're seeing that right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. There's so much that people are learning and we don't have all the answers. And so there's lots of debates going on. That's fine. That's fine. There aren't clear answers. If there were clear answers, we wouldn't be debating them unless people just want to argue for the sake of argument. And there's plenty of that going on too, but we try to encourage students not to do that. Know that what you're learning in science or anything else is provisional. It supplies a temporary framework for what you're understanding, but you're going to build on that. You're going to fill in the brushstrokes between the framework until you get the big picture someday. And that's what scientific theories and models do. If you don't have an opinion on something, and I have 7 children, which I'll say more about in a minute, but I'm always telling, especially my very argumentative teenage daughters, don't be afraid to say I don't have an opinion on that yet. They go out in the public school and defend. They come home every day talking about pro-life issues, and I just sort of gave them the freedom to talk about it with people and to ask people to make sense and assert their opinion, back up their opinion, but don't get too upset if the other person doesn't accept your opinion, because there's all kinds of reasons why people might not do that. Keep the conversation going though. Impress people to support their own opinions. Because the last part of this little section, as Aquinas said, citing Aristotle, a small mistake in the beginning is a big one in the end. And that gets back to what I'm saying about correct, at least understanding what your starting assumptions are. For us, with science, we see everything in the light of faith. Science in the light of faith, God created everything. Science is the study of the handiwork of God. But to take that even beyond, we have to see everything as God's providence. I had 3 steps for, and I want to build on these then leading up to this, 3 steps for navigating science in the light of faith. And I want to adjust these 3 steps to teaching Catholic youth how to think critically. Know your faith. I work here at the St. Philip Institute. We have books that we produce to teach, just like a lot of dioceses do. They're called minor catechisms that we use to teach the people about the Catholic faith. So many Catholics have never really been told that. They've never really understood that you have to know what the church teaches. You have to be confident in your faith, not just like, oh yeah, I believe in God and I'm going to do what the church teaches. You have to know why. The church has answers to every question you can ask about the faith. If you get into some theological nuance, maybe there's not a real clear answer there because there's theological development going on, but at least you know that. But for the vast majority of things, anyone's going to ask, why do we do this? Why do we believe that? Just like physics equations are very carefully derived from starting observations in the physical world, church doctrine and dogma is carefully derived from what Jesus Christ revealed to us in the Gospels and through the tradition of the Catholic Church. It's all starting assumption is Christ said so, the word, the truth. And everything the church articulates is carefully derived from that. Logically, if this, if what Christ said is true, if this is his body, then boom, we have the liturgy. And it's carefully articulated over time. Every single thing we do in the liturgy is trying to repay worship to God that he is owed. So know what the church teaches. If you want children to be able to think critically, they need to know what God revealed to us. This is true as true gets for everybody, every person, whether the person's Catholic or not. God created all of us to know and love him. And when God revealed truths to us, people need those truths to be able to reason correctly. Now, if you're not Catholic, you might be like, why should I adopt what the church says? How do you know that's because, again, we took what God said and derived very carefully the formulas of the doctrines of our faith. And you need to know what those are. I said in the book, begin to learn the science only after you're confident about what the church teaches, like with evolution. God created us body and soul. Okay, science is never going to deny the existence of the human soul. Science is never going to deny the existence of God. Science is never going to rule out the human person is created by God, that the human race is united. Once you're clear on that stuff, then you dive into the science. And then the third thing I called sort out the system of the wills. And I'll say more about that as we go, but this was my attempt to try to understand the human person. So what I mean by that is when I was defending my PhD, my dissertation in chemistry, in the middle, in the throes of my materialism, I didn't call it that at the time, but as a chemist who wasn't religious, I pretty much looked at the whole world as a collection of atoms and molecules doing their thing. And I knew some equations, I knew some rules, I knew how to manipulate atoms, sort of, it's really hard to master, nobody can, but I knew something about chemistry. And I looked at everything, and this wasn't just a cute little philosophical idea I had. It's one of the things I talk about it now. It was dangerous. I viewed other people as collections of atoms and molecules. And think about all the ways that messes up your appreciation for your fellow man. I didn't understand government and politics. I didn't understand the point of a society. I didn't understand the point of religion. I didn't understand motherhood. I didn't understand relationships, period. And it wreaked havoc on my life. And I didn't understand why until I became Catholic and I started understanding. And I called it in my book, System of Wills, but there's God's will, the divine will. God created everything. He created matter to follow laws of nature, laws of physics. And atoms pretty much do what they're supposed to do. Just like I looked at people, if you have a thought, and there are plenty of scientists today who say this exact thing and promote it, that we don't have free will. Now, whatever we think, it's just our atoms and molecules and neurons in our brain doing their thing. And we think it because that's just what our atoms and molecules were doing. And there's no free will. And if you take free will away, there's really no intelligence. There's no accounting for the human soul. In the system of wills, you have God's will, created everything. And you have atoms and molecules following the laws of nature. And then you have the human person, which is the composite of body, physical matter, and soul. And so the human person has this rational soul created in the image and likeness of God. I don't have the coronavirus. I just had a little cough. You have the human person created in the image and likeness of God. And this is one of the things that blew me away from my materialism. And it made so much sense in my life. God the Father generates God the Son as an act of the intellect. That's what theology teaches us. That's what we derive from what Christ told us. And God the Father and the Son together as one substance spirate forth as an act of the will, the Holy Spirit in love. And so you have truth, God the Father generating the Word, Christ, God, the second person of the Holy Trinity, God the Son. You have truth, intellect, reason, and then God the Father and the Son together as one substance, spirating forth the Holy Spirit in love. You have love. So right there in that circumcision of the Holy Trinity, you have perfect knowing, perfect truth, perfect loving, perfect willing. And when we say we're made in the image and likeness of God, we have in our rational soul the same capabilities, the same faculties, but we don't do it perfectly. We don't think perfectly. We don't reason perfectly, but we can reason rationally. We have to try. And we don't love perfectly, but we can work on our relationships and our choices, just like God is a relationship. We're made for communion. When you understand that about the human soul, it changes everything about your outlook that the human person is just a collection of atoms and molecules. It made my life very hard because I could no longer just dismiss, raising kids. I checked the boxes. I did this, I did this, I did this. You should turn out fine. And it doesn't happen. I did this, I did this, I did this. My marriage should be fine. It doesn't happen. What you have to do, and a lot of Catholics know this way better, I'm late to the game here. What you have to do is you have to bond the souls. It's not just an atoms bonding, they're electrons whizzing around each other sharing, it's all these perfect rules. You have to bond souls. And since we have free will, there ain't no rules. There are rules that we need to follow that are ordered, but you can't control the other person the way a chemist can control atoms and molecules in the lab. And that took me decades to figure out, and I'm still working on it. But I want students to know, once you know what the church teaches, once you start learning about science, you have to understand that there is the physical world that follows the laws that God created. And then there are people who don't follow by compulsion certain laws. They have free will. So you have to take all that into account. It's a system. So what I mean by teaching Catholic youth to think critically is teaching is the imparting of knowledge. Just checking my watch. The imparting of knowledge or instruction. So we all know what teaching means, but I mean to say that we need to impart to our youth what I just said. Know what the church teaches, begin to learn whatever, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we have to teach them how to start there. And what I'm saying, somebody said, are you saying to do science, you have to have faith, that faith comes before science? And I said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. With anything, if you want to teach kids to think critically, they need to know what God revealed and what the church has guarded down through time. Catholic meaning the church universal, teaching Catholic youth between childhood and adult age, although this would apply to any age, to think. This is meaning to search for truth, to reason, okay, to search for truth. And it matters when you tell kids that. I'm teaching you in our faith. I'm not just teaching you this stuff that you have to pick up the catechism and memorize it and learn it. You should memorize things, but I'm teaching it to you because I want you to know the truth. I want you to love your Protestant brothers and sisters. I want you to love your atheist friends. My kids have atheist friends. I want you to know all of that, but I want you to know that the fullness of the truth is guarded in the Catholic Church. And if you want the fullness of the truth, seek what the church teaches about things. But know that you have to, when you get beyond theology and religion, and you go out there in the world confident in your faith, you do have to roll your sleeves up, just like in science, and you have to start thinking critically and that means the thinking and the willing, the free will that we have as humans, with good judgment and with precision. Carefully identify the words that you're using and learn to think with precision, and do it in the light of faith. This is how you teach Catholic youth to think critically. You have to teach them their faith first. So I'm adjusting those 3 steps that I have in the book about science. Again, No change here. Know what the Catholic Church teaches. Begin to learn the blank. Okay? It's not just science anymore. If you're teaching kids about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, they need to understand what it means to be human, made in the image and likeness of God, to know and be known, to love and be loved, to belong in communities, and to seek the truth, because that's how we form our laws. I have other examples. If you're teaching, this is one of my favorite authors, not Catholic. I'm not afraid to read books that aren't Catholic because I know what the church teaches, and I'm able to go in and sort through it, just like I'm able to go in and sort through science and say this is consistent with our faith, this is not, and I can pick my way through evolution, which is what I teach in the book, Navigating Science in the Light of Faith. I navigate everything in the light of faith. I can look just like the first Christians did when they were clarifying what the Greek teaching brought, and even what Aquinas did, in the 13th century. They're purifying other philosophies. I can purify stuff in the secular world because I know what the church teaches. This is Mary Pfeiffer. She spent her life interviewing young girls. I have 5 of my 7 children are daughters. 4 of them are teenagers right now, and that my oldest one is 30. But I read this book because my own daughters had trouble with anxiety and cutting and eating disorders. And I read this to find out from her wisdom how she worked with girls. She worked with young girls that came from these disorders. And she didn't use the Catholic language, but I recognized it. The reason the girls were cutting, having eating disorders, is because there was a void in their soul. They were longing to know and be known, to people to understand them. They were longing to love and be loved. A lot of them came from broken homes or abuse. They were longing to belong, and they would physically injure themselves because that was at least a pain with limits, because the spiritual pain was boundless, and they didn't understand it because they hadn't been taught what the church teaches, and they didn't understand why it hurt so much. And so they would do something to take away that spiritual pain. And she says as much, but not with the same words I just used. But when you understand that's what the problem is, and I'm very sorry to say and sad to say with much regret, I raised my oldest 2 children with my former mindset, and they did have those voids. And once I understood why they had those voids, then I understood how to go about fixing it. And it took time, but it worked. Here's a book by Christian authors, Safe People. Begin to learn the blank. In this case, this is begin to learn what psychiatrists and therapists say about healing relationships. This is a Christian book, but it's not Catholic. And so you're able to look through here and say, there's a lot of truth here. There are some places where we can fill that truth out a little more. Basically, these people, and these are the same authors that wrote the Boundaries book, you have a boundary. People are like atoms in that we have a boundary, and when people bond with each other, it's kind of like when atoms bond with each other, they're sharing electrons. Humans share souls. And so it's really hard to bond soul to soul with another person. Probably marriage and the relationships with our kids are the hardest ones to bond because you get to know each other so well. Your souls have to overlap to becoming one so well that you're completely vulnerable. And these books are written to help people navigate the pain in relationships with toxic people. But once you understand why it hurts, you start to understand how to fix it. I got a lot of examples here. I collect books like this. The Love Languages of Teenagers, or Love Languages of Anyone. I know it's kind of a goofy book, but it's very, very helpful. Communicating Love. It's all about truth, knowledge, love, free will. I do a lot with bioethics in the bioethics field. This is probably one of the hardest areas for me to begin to learn the blank, because I have to wade into the mindset of people who use dead children from abortion to do research, because their mindset is if you're going to do research on understanding the human body or finding cures, what better test subject than an actual human body? And it's disgusting to say, but there is an abundant supply of them because abortion is legal in our country. And this is a book from the 1970s, back when abortion was first becoming legal. And the reasoning of these people is it's better to put those bodies of those children to use in science for research than to just discard them. And that's why we have this pervasive problem today of people using fetuses in research. Even in the coronavirus vaccine is going on right now. It's all over the scientific literature. And you have to be able to begin to learn that. You have to dive into it, because then when you understand what the problem is, what's the problem here? They don't understand the human person. They don't understand what the Catholic Church teaches about the human person being body and soul. And that if you are a body with a rational soul, then you are an individual substance of a rational nature, which is the definition of person. You are a person, and that children need to be loved unconditionally from the first moment they exist. That's what the church teaches. That would guide us out of this mess we're in the present day. I have lots and lots of examples. This is a book from neuroscience, understanding the human person in the context of neuroscience and how our brains do things and how that interacts with our souls. There's a whole lot to be learned there. But this is how teaching Catholic youth or anybody else to think critically. Start with faith. Don't be afraid to go into the secular realms, whether it's homosexuality, abortion, chastity, sexual issues, pornography, cutting, eating disorders, all the difficult stuff. You can't be afraid to go into those things. And with kids, this is where a parent is very, very important, and a teacher. You want them to know they're going to have to do this. They're going to have to face challenging topics, and they need confidence in the truth of what the church teaches to be able to navigate their way through it, to pick out what by navigate I mean, and I do this with science, but I do it with everything else too. Pick out what is consistent with church teaching and truth. Pick out what is inconsistent with church teaching and reject it and know why, so you can analyze it. And then there's a third pot of topics. Some things they're just neutral. They're not consistent or inconsistent. They might help us understand theology better. They might help us understand each other better, like with neuroscience. So when you divide things into those three groups, you can fix the things that were rejected and shine the light of truth on it. You can say this is truth and give people credit as far as you can. And then you can say, here's where the real scholarly work needs to happen. That's critical thinking. Instead of saying, remember the system of wills, I would change it to just every social ill, every problem, whether it's relationships, marriages, parenting. I have started to notice that it pretty much comes down to that thing I myself experienced as a chemist who was not religious. Remember what it means to be human. I don't want to open that. Remember what it means to be human. And I have a page from the Catechism just to show you what I mean. But remembering that the human person is body and soul, a rational soul made in the image and likeness of God, with the spiritual faculties of intelligence and free will. We're made to seek truth. We're made to seek love. And if we aren't finding those things, there will be pain. There will be brokenness. And when you understand that you're made for that, it clarifies a lot of the way out. It lights the path. Dogmas are lights along the path. It helps us guide the future. And so why do we need to think critically? Why do we need youth to think critically? Because we need them to help the human race truly progress forward, not just in science, but in everything else. I want to tell you, though, personally, so I can't see everybody out there, and I wish I could. I much prefer standing up in front of a room. But I'm not just talking a talk here. I became Catholic and I radically changed my life. But I also said, part of that was I need to be open to life, and I need to accept children are not collections, highly complex composite systems of atoms and molecules. Children are gifts, like the Catechism says, and we need to accept those gifts from God. This is, and I want to show you how this manifested in my life, because as a chemist, I was kind of a perfectionist in my relationships. Check the boxes, you should be perfect. Check all the boxes and my life should be perfect. And it wasn't happening. That was part of the trauma, the tragedy of my life that caused me to convert. This is my oldest daughter. Her name is Reagan. I had her when I was 20. She's now 31, just turned 31 last week. And she very much, and she knows I talk about this, and she and I have talked about it a long time. She grew up with a mother who was single, who put her in daycare and neglected her, who cared more about her career as a chemist than raising a child, who did not understand the human person, and who left her with a void. And she had a lot of problems when she grew up because she couldn't form healthy relationships because she had never had one. She had been damaged. She'd been hurt. And she didn't understand where that hurt was coming from. And by the time I figured it out and tried to tell her, it was too late. There was no trust there. And she had problems with cutting and drug addiction. And when she grew up, she spent much of her adult life as, under the prison of drug addiction. And she had these children. This is her oldest, Jack. These are two of her other children, Marita and Judah. And she lost custody of them for a while, until she, like I did in the 30s, started to ask questions and figure things out. These are her other two children. She just had a year ago. They're a year old now. She had twin girls, Olivia and Octavia, so I call her Oregano, my little spice. These are her other two daughters that she had while she was recovering from drug addiction. And she had to face a society that told her, you can't do this. You need to have an abortion. You need to not have these babies. You're not married. You're not going to be able to do this. And she was listening to me, but she was also listening to her own soul. She said, no, I'm going to do this. And I'm so proud of her now. We are reconciled because I understand you got a bond soul to soul, which means sometimes you need to zip it and not dole out advice and check all the boxes. Sometimes you just need to listen to what the other person is saying and not be afraid of what they're saying, but let them speak. Be willing to heal any damage that has been done. That's part of thinking critically. And listen and try to understand the other person. We're very close now. We talk all the time. She's put a down payment on a house. She's got custody of all her children. She has been off and free and clean off of drugs for 2 years, and she's doing fantastic. And there is understanding between us. Those babies, this one had to have surgery. They're now doing great, as is she. This is my son. I had him before I became Catholic. And I also had some damage in the relationship with him. He went off after he graduated high school and joined the Navy, became a nuclear engineer, which made me very happy because we talk chemistry now. And he has married. But I try to dispel this myth that if you're Catholic, you have to have these perfect Catholic children that do everything. And people ask me all the time in the faith and science realm, what do you do if your child leaves the faith? Well, I don't have any check the boxes kind of answers for that. What do you do if you have students who are leaving the faith? You have to get to know people. So if it's a child, if it's a student, sometimes you have to listen and hear them out and let them be where they are and not be afraid. Just like I'm not afraid to go into secular literature and pick out what's true, what's not true. Don't be afraid to listen to someone else and be ready to tell them this is true, this is not true. Let's talk about this. That's how you get to know and be known and love and be loved. You can't love if you don't know the person. He is not going to Catholic church now, even though he was raised Catholic from the time I converted on, but he believes in God. He's got a happy marriage. He understands what it means to be human, and these relationships are going and going and going. They are continuing. He has found that his gift is giving gifts, and my son, his name is Max, has taken to thinking so hard about what makes somebody else happy that he is becoming notorious for giving the best gifts, like not the most expensive gifts, but I have gift bags from Amazon, a whole drawer full of them, because he showers me with gifts. And it's his way of showing that he loves me and that our relationship is okay. These are my 5 post-Catholic kids. I like to say they came along as I was converting. I had 4 daughters in 5 years. These 4 are teenagers now. And again, I had to really get my head around the truths of the Catholic Church. When I got pregnant with that 4th daughter, the little one here, the Catholic hospital where I lived and went told me to have an abortion because I couldn't handle that many kids. It would make me too anxious. I knew what the church taught, and I knew it so well that even in a Catholic hospital, when I was told to do something against church teaching, I knew to reject it. And of course I did. And set out about raising these kids. Little Lucy, my little light, is growing up just like all the rest of them. And this is our cabin in the woods where we grew up. But you can see here in this picture too, it took me a long time to shed this perfectionist, everything is atoms and molecules thinking. Even though I was Catholic, I was still I had the idea that as a Catholic mother, I had to have this perfect facade that these 5 kids are going to be raised in the Catholic faith, and they're going to make good choices. They're not going to have this brokenness. They're not going to make bad decisions, because I'm going to do my job as a mother now and teach them to think and teach them to know the Catholic faith. The thing I didn't see coming, which is what I talk about with thinking critically, if you teach a kid to follow the truth and pursue the truth, guess what that kid's going to do? They're going to ask you a lot of questions, and they're going to challenge things. If you teach a kid to think critically, you better be ready. Not only is it difficult at times to answer the onslaught of never-ending questions, just like JJ saying, is my arm made of atoms? Be ready for the kid to say, if we're supposed to be united with God forever and be happy, does that mean we should want to die? You got to answer the difficult questions, because when you teach a kid to think, he or she will. And sometimes the child in the teenage years will think that he has found the truth that nobody else found before. And you gotta let them sort through that too. Just like with the kid with the physics problems, you gotta lead them through it and let them learn to sort things out and not panic while the process is going on. And there's JJ, a little older there. Those 4 daughters, this is their confirmation when we moved to Texas, because we have restored order, so they all were confirmed on the same day. Lucy, the little one, is now playing the bassoon in public school. Marie is my soul sister chemist. She loves science. Mercedes Grace found her voice singing in the choir, but she went through a few years where she wasn't sure how she felt about relationships or guys or girls, and she went through some tough stuff. And that's JJ, a little older there. And then just when I thought I had it all figured out as a mother, and that I was never going to be back where my oldest daughter was, with that brokenness and bad choices to live through, and it's what I mean, I'm still learning things at age 51. Last summer, when I was at a Steubenville conference getting ready to give a talk on Catholic parenting, my then 15-year-old called me and said, Mom, I've got to tell you something. 3 a.m. in the morning, she called me and she said, I'm pregnant. And she had heard me say all her life that you have to be parents before the baby even comes along, because babies need to be conceived in love. There need to be a mommy and daddy married before the baby comes along. And she knew that, and she knew she had grown up that way. But she still made some choices of her own. And she knew, though, to call me. And the very first thing out of my mouth at 3 a.m., because I so know what the church teaches here, the first thing out of my mouth was, and I didn't panic, I said, Abby, every child deserves to be loved unconditionally from the first moment of his or her existence. So just like I love you unconditionally and you're never going to lose my love, you've got to love your child the same way, starting right now. And let that guide every decision you make from here on out. And she did. She said, I knew that's what you'd say, Mom. And she told me later that, she understands why some girls want to have abortions because she thought her life was over. And that she was so relieved when I told her that. And she went to school and she had to deal with people all around her, from teachers and adults to other kids to boys who made fun of her because she was rejected by the father and left on her own to deal with it. She had to deal with people all around her telling her that she needs to have an abortion. And she had to stand up and she had to grow up really fast, but she was grounded in her faith. And she said, it's not my body, my choice, it's my baby's body. And I have to love this child. And she did let love guide every single step of the way. People said she's not going to make it through high school. She's finished her 11th grade year and is almost finished with her 12th grade year and is probably going to graduate a year early. She got busy because she understood what was at stake. Things get broken in life. That's part of critical thinking. She knew what the goal was. And so even though things weren't perfect, how many families are not perfect? All of them, except the Holy Family. They're broken, but you have to know what the goal is. You have to know, even if you're not perfect, you got to know where you're going. And she knows that that baby needs love, that needs to be surrounded by love, that even if her situation is not perfect, she's got a family that's going to surround that baby with love, and she'll figure out the rest. One of the wisest things I have to say about thinking critically and raising children and teaching students, this last picture here is me with some kids back at Whataburger. I've completely decided that the reason restaurants are so successful in our culture is because communing together around a table and talking is very Trinitarian, that we are spending time getting to know each other and love each other. And it's a good thing to do. Anytime I have a problem, the kids need to talk, I have learned to just offer food and let's sit down and talk. So I put all of this here because this is the messy reality of my life. I want people to know this about me. I spoke about faith and science for a long time, and it sounded like I was smart because I know about chemistry. And so there's this Catholic intellectual, studied theology, mother of 7. This is the perfection of what Catholic motherhood should look like. No, the perfection of what Catholic motherhood or Catholic teaching, if you're a teacher, should look like is that you've got to care about the person in front of you. You've got to know that every family is broken, every person has sin, everybody is charting their own way through this life that we're in, this valley of tears at time. And that if you want to think critically, you've got to get to know the other person, you've got to get to know the issues, and you've got to view it all through the lens of the Catholic faith and be confident in what the church teaches you. Just to give an example before I wrap up, this is the page, you recognize the background, of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Just like JJ said, these diatoms, thank you God for everything. But look at the order that God created us with. And this is what I mean by remember what it means to be human. We are created in the image of God, made in his own image, to know and be known, to love and be loved. We have a unique place in creation. We are body and rational soul composites. We're not like the other animals. We can create. We are co-creators with God because we can use our intelligence. Chemists know all about that. We are united. Our nature unites the spiritual and the material world. So don't forget that we are souls, that we are also souls. We're not just bodies. We're able to know and love our Creator and each other. We are called to share by knowledge and love. There's the Trinitarian truth and love in God's own life. And that's where our dignity as a person comes from. We're not just collections of atoms and molecules. We are people. We're someone. And that we are made for relationship, to enter into communion with other persons. Do you see all of this truth here? That God created everything. Science is the study of creation. And that if you really want to know what it means to be human, The reality is only in the mystery of the Word made flesh that we truly start to understand who we are, that we have to heal our relationship with Christ, the Lord of the universe, God who created everything. That's who we are in the presence of in every Eucharistic presence, in every Mass, when we are there before the Eucharist. We have to heal our relationship, heal that original sin with our Creator and Redeemer before we can start to heal our relationships with others. And that, as we're seeing now with the COVID-19, that is why the human race forms a unity. That's why we're all in this together and why we need each other. And I know that's a lot of maybe fluffy stuff, but it is part of thinking critically. You've got to know the other person. You've got to be able to sort things out. So that's my formula. It's not just faith and science, it's everything. That's how to navigate life. Know what the church teaches. Don't be afraid to learn about stuff going on in the world around you, and remember what it means to be human. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Let's see, here we go. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I encourage anybody to go ahead and send in any questions or thoughts. I for one, as you started speaking as a professor of faith and science, certainly came around to what ultimately I think so many of us know, whether we live it or not is different, right? That really the most important thing is that human connection and that love. You definitely have touched many hearts here. I already have a few comments. Tiffany says, thank you for this webinar. I have 4 children, 3 who are adults who have left the faith. This is a true consolation to my mother's heart. Laura says, it seems like the most important thing we can do is to create relationships and help them to grow as disciples, as catechists, not worry so much about them being able to recite doctrine. Thank you for letting love guide. Got another comment here, Josie. I bought both the teacher and student editions of the Particles of Faith book several months ago. There was an offer to receive electronic study guides. Okay, we do have the teacher resource guide available online, so I can talk to you about that. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this presentation and your story. I attend many of these webinars. This has been the best one yet, says Patricia. Amazing talk. Wow, thank you. And I loved the comment, I needed my own German Shepherd when speaking of Benny. Lots and lots of thank yous. We had some questions when you started sharing some of the different books with us. The first one, I think, had maybe a woman with gray hair on it. Was that correct? What was the name of that book? Okay, Mary Pfeiffer.
Yeah, so this is not her most well-known book. I gave away the other one. The book that made her established as an author is called Reviving Ophelia. So she ties it to the myth. Reviving Ophelia, it's about helping the girls in culture that, cutting and eating disorders. But if you search her name, Reviving Ophelia is her groundbreaking work, and I've read that, and I've read this one too. She's spent her whole career talking to young girls and studying what led them to do the things they did.
Is she an atheist? Is that a
I
different
want
book?
to say she was. I might be wrong here. I want to say she was like what they call a non-practicing Jew. So she wasn't religious. There wasn't any. That's one thing I remember. It's been a number of years since I read the book. There wasn't any discussion of religion, but she tiptoed around the spiritual a lot. And so it was almost like you're just like, I'm dying to sit down and have coffee with her because I need to tell her something. Because you just want to tell her that's what you're trying to say, but the church has the language.
Okay, Mary Pat asks, I'm a therapist, so this warms my heart. Could you say something about relating to husbands?
Um, I am convinced. So my husband and I have a very strong sacramental marriage, and we're in it for the long haul. And two becoming one for us is all the memories we share that nobody else would get. But he's a mathematician, but he was a cradle Catholic who had stopped practicing the faith when we met, and we kind of led each other into the church. I said I need the truth, and he said I know where you can find it, and so we went to find it. But the damage from my materialism and his exacting mathematic thinking. We were married on 01, 02, 03, by the way, January 2nd of 2003, because we figured that was a good day to start our life together. But the damage from that, what we've learned as a couple is, we did not know how to do the feelings thing. Like if you had told me emotions, I was like, whatever. The love languages book, I totally wouldn't read it for a long time. I find it very helpful now. But that relationship is almost like trying to bond two atoms together too closely. Because you know how atoms, they have the positive nuclei because of the protons there. And an atom, when it bonds, the electrons will orbit around both nuclei. So the negative electrons are orbiting around the positive protons in the nucleus. And that's what glues the atoms together in the bond, is that the electrons are attracted to both the protons. But the distance between two atoms when they bond is limited, because if you try to shove them too close together, this is why salt crystals shatter when you hit them. The two positive charges coming too close together repel, and it breaks the bond if you try to cram them too close together. And I felt that way in marriage so many times. Like, we are so close, I'd put up a wall. Like, I'm all done. I'm not going to be any more vulnerable. I'm not going there. We just can't overlap this much. And it caused a lot of problems that we had to work through, and a lot of therapy as husband and wife, trying to understand what it means to becoming one, that I need to stop talking sometimes and listen, and I don't need to panic if I think he's saying something that might mean rejecting me. I need to listen. I need to understand him. I was very much a control freak. And I do a lot of talking on this now because I think a lot of people in our society just think the way I did too. They're very materialist in their thinking, even if they're spiritual, even if they're Catholic. There's a lot of how much parenting advice and marriage advice is check the box, check the box, check the box, everything will be perfect. And I had to learn, God bless me, I was trying so hard to do everything perfect, but I had to learn to let go of being perfect. And I had to learn to just get to know the man in front of me. It's so simple, but it took me so long to understand that. And, we both kind of like put the guard down and learn to be really, really vulnerable in that most intimate of all bonds. I think the marital bond is the hardest bond to form. And I think it's very helpful if young people just know that from the beginning. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, because you are going to be so vulnerable that you are going to be hurt. But it's going to be okay, because it's hard. There are things to do. I find very much therapeutic help in the theological virtues and the cardinal virtues. Those are your formulas for getting through life. So I think I would love to do a whole like marriage therapy using the theological and cardinal virtues.
Thank you so much. Tara says, what is your advice for knowing what the church teaches? I'm a teacher at a Catholic high school, and while I feel I know what the church teaches sometimes, I get nervous when they ask me some of the tough questions. What is your advice when you find yourself feeling pinned up against a wall and you're not positive of the answer?
And I get that way. I've been teaching chemistry for a long time. I still get stumped by chemistry students who notoriously ask me questions. And I just tell them this sometimes. I'm like, you know what? You just ask a question that no adult that I know of ever thought to ask before. And, let them be confident that it's okay to ask a question. And sometimes, so whenever I couldn't answer it, so where to find the answer is the catechism. I would just go look it up in the catechism and try to find the answer. But sometimes what I would do with my science students when they stumped me, I let them know they stumped me, and I would say, you know what? I'm going to post a discussion in the learning management system with your question, and I'm going to let the whole class try. Everybody who tries to answer it gets 5 points on the next quiz, and whoever actually answers it, and I'll verify it, who answers it correctly gets more points, 10 points. Then I would just turn it back over to them and let them start looking it up. But if there's ever a theological question, I go straight to the big catechism and search it and look it up in there, because there will be, I'm sure you already know this, but the beautiful thing about the catechism is that it has all these references where you can look it up and go all the way back through the development of the doctrine in the church over time.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a great idea. So I know that we're running over a little bit, so I don't want to take everybody's time, or at least be respectful of that. And so I did want to offer, as we always do, a discount on Stacy's books. We've got both the original Particles of Faith and the student edition. And there's also a free downloadable teacher resource guide available too at avemariapress.com. So we're offering 20% off using the code webinar0414, and this is good through the end of April. Stacy, once again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. And I invite everybody to join us next week, same time, where Michelle Fainley and Emily Jaminet, two of our authors who've written a new book called Pray Fully, will discuss how to rejuvenate your prayer life to build your ministry. So once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.